Yes, yes. So even if she's kicking and screaming and no, I don't want to go, you can bring her into your house, cut her nails, shave her head. You're my wife.
Where did it say that you're allowed to force her into your house?
Where does it say anything about whether she rejects you or not? It says it doesn't say anything.
So as usual, Brother Costa, you are reading in your myopic view into it, thinking that it means that that's what actual scholarship means. And I'm actually glad that you brought up Deuteronomy 21, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, because what you just read actually proves the exact opposite of what you're trying to claim. So I'll walk you through it. Always. Well, it's like 9:30 p.m. by you, right?
9:30, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, Brother Costa. Well, this topic was your idea, and I was actually happy. So Numbers 31, I'll let you say whatever you got to say for a few minutes. The topic is very basic. Does Numbers 31 expose the Bible? Now, usually Numbers 31 comes up because Christians will talk about the child marriage of Aisha and Muhammad, and then they try to make the insinuation that Moses was doing the same thing in Numbers 31. Is that what you think, Brother Costa?
So I think it'll be worthwhile to read Numbers 31 for the chat. I don't know if they've read it or not. 1 second. So Numbers 31. My argument is that I've seen you make a lot of backhanded comments towards Muslims. Beheading of the Jews and then marriage to Aisha and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a warlord, this and that. So it's worth noting. Numbers 31, what does Moses say? I'll just read a section of your Bible. They fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man. Among their victims were Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. The Israelites captured the Midianite women and children and took all the Midianite herds, flocks, and goods as plunder. They burned all the towns where Midianites had settled, as well as their camps. They took all the plunder and spoils, including the people and animals. They brought the captives, spoils, and plunder to Moses. Okay. Yes. So, have you allowed all the women to live? He asked them. Verse 15, verse 16, they were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident. So the plague struck the Lord's people. Now, so this is Moses. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has not slept with a man, which is basically, girls that aren't married, implied young girls. Kill all the boys though. So my argument is that it's not, yes, Moses is the one that says this, but the God of the Old Testament is Jesus. This is what some Christians, they conveniently only like to focus on the New Testament, but if you proclaim that Jesus is God, then Jesus is also the God of the Old Testament.
Yes.
And therefore he is dictating all of this killing. So I just want to know, I didn't catch your explanation. I just only caught the last part of it. So I was just wondering how you justify, because in your description it says prepare for the context. So I want to see how you.
Yes. Now, my first question to you is, when you say what you say, have you ever read Numbers chapter 25, or have you only ever read Numbers chapter 31?
I've read Numbers 31. I haven't read 25.
Yes, I know. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, my opponent, as usual, reads it and he skips over the plain reading and the cultural historical context of it. I love Brother Costa. I was anxious for him to come here, so I'm going to clear up every misconception of what he was trying to insinuate, because every single time Numbers 31 comes up, ladies and gentlemen, people skip the actual context and they try to weaponize the Bible without understanding what it actually says. So let's look at what it actually says. Numbers 31 verse 16 tells you exactly what happened. The Midianite women, under Balaam's influence, intentionally led Israel into spiritual betrayal through pagan worship, and it involved immoral practices. Now, this was not random violence or conquest. It was divine judgment on a national level, a spiritual attack. Now, yes, the Israelite forces were told to remove those that were responsible, right? But notice the young girls were spared. Why? because they were not involved in the corruption. That was God showing mercy and not abuse. They were later brought into Israelite society, and as Deuteronomy chapter 21 verses 10 through 14 shows, which I'm sure my brother has not read also, they could only be married under very strict covenantal conditions with protection, rights, and dignity. That's not even close to the distorted image that my brother here is painting. Now, let's talk about the double standard, which is why I was talking about it. Surah 18, 80, and 81. A child is eliminated by divine order, supposedly, for something he might do in the future. There was no rebellion, no judgment, just preemptive removal. Very convenient. Surah 424 talks about captive women who can be taken without marriage, even if they were already married. Interesting. Surah chapter 65 verse 4 says references marriage and separation procedures involving girls who are still very young. So here's the problem. You're accusing the Bible and Jesus of something that your own sources actually explicitly permit. Numbers 31 was judgment in response to national betrayal, which you didn't know about because you didn't read Numbers chapter 25. The Quran, on the other hand, allows far more troubling actions with far less justification. And what's even more insulting is the insinuation that when Moses and the Israelites took the young girls, the insinuation you're making is that they took them for themselves to be slaves for you know what, which is completely not what the actual context is saying. It was telling them to take them and integrate them into Israelite society so that they can actually have a chance at life outside of the normal pagan practices that they were given. I will yield back to my opponent, and I'm interested to see what his rebuttal is.
So just to clarify, you said that when the Bible says, take the women who have not known a man, your reason for this is, they were innocent and that's why they took them in. Is that your answer?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty clear.
Okay, so if it's the women that were enticing the Israelites to betray their, God or whatever, why is it said to kill all the boys? Why are there no innocent young boys?
Very interesting. Let's clarify why. The young girls were spared because according to Numbers 31:16, the women under Balaam's counsel were the ones who led Israel into spiritual betrayal, right? Through immoral rituals, right? Prostitution or whatever. Right. Okay. Now, regarding the boys in ancient tribal warfare, boys were not neutral. They represented the future generation of that same system. Mind you, if you go back to Numbers 25, you would see that all of the generations of boys grew up, every single one, to be the same pagan idolaters and warriors of that nation. So if God decided that they needed to go, it was because they had already been being conditioned to be who they were. Now, if you look at it, that wasn't personal. It was, again, covenantal justice in a tribal world where loyalties were passed down through family lines. The goal was not cruelty here. Ladies and gentlemen, it was prevention of future threats against the covenantal people. Now, again, we can go back to the Quran again, but I don't think I need to do that. At the end of the day, what happens is you're looking at something and you're trying to appeal to emotion and you're trying to appeal to atrocity, but you are forgetting that this was judgment by God. So you can talk about the boys all you want, but at the end of the day, the boys were not spared for a very simple reason.
Yeah, so why do you bring up the example of the Quran when the boy was killed?
Because the boy was killed for something that he might do. You're comparing two very different things.
Saying we killed all the young boys because all of the young boys apparently in the past used to grow up and they used to be this archetypal person that rebelled against God. So it's the same thing.
How is it the same thing? Do you know the context of the surah you're referring to, or are you just saying it?
Yes, it's the one in Surah Kahf, right?
Yeah. So you're saying that the boy in Surah 18 verses 80 and 81 was removed because he might become someone rebellious in the future, while in Numbers 31, the Midianite boys were dealt with because of a historical pattern of rebellion, right? You're missing the key difference here, my brother.
They still haven't done anything.
But again, you're confusing God's actual judgment with, okay, this is a judgment. Now, mind you, he's looking at this society, the Midianites, for centuries. He even sent people to warn them to stop doing what they were doing. And they continue to do it for centuries, right? In Numbers 31, God acted after real national level betrayal. We're talking about nationwide. The Midianites had already launched a coordinated spiritual attack through seduction and false worship. Again, go back to Numbers 25 and Numbers 31:16 to look at the actual context of it. The women who were involved were judged. The boys were not punished for imaginary future sins. They were a part of a tribal system that had already shown itself hostile to Israel. So do you think that those little boys were going to grow up? Hold on, stop. That's not.
I refuse to believe like the 2- and 3-year-old boys were in this conspiracy against Israel.
It doesn't. Here's the thing. God sees the beginning from the end. So you're confusing what you refuse to believe, right? You're confusing what you refuse to believe with what actually matters. The fact of the matter is, if God had them stricken out, it's because he knew what they were going to grow up to be. Still showing ultimate mercy, because if he struck them out at a certain age, guess what ends up happening? They now go back to the Father because he didn't allow them to get into the point where they would become warriors for the Midianite nation that would, by default, attack the Israelites once again. But I want to get back to your original point.
Don't bring up the Quranic example.
No, I can bring up the Quranic example. I know it makes you uncomfortable, but in Surah 18, where Allah has a boy eliminated because of what he might do, there's no national rebellion, there's no war, there's no context, right? This was just a hypothetical.
This whole thing about God seeing from the past, God seeing from the future, this is just not applicable then.
Well, the difference is, you got to remember that when I look at the Quran, I don't actually believe, nor do many people, that this was actually a command from God. This is just Muhammad doing it.
What?
You see what I mean? You see the difference?
What do you mean it's Muhammad doing it? Who did it in this story? Let's see if you've read it.
In Surah 18, you're saying where Allah had a boy limited. So who took out the boy that Allah supposedly commanded?
I'm asking you.
No. You're the one bringing it up. You're the one. You know the story, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so go ahead.
Saying that Muhammad said it. Do you know what the story is?
Sure, go ahead. Tell us the story, because you're trying to compare two very different things. You told me to do a stream about Numbers 31, and now we're talking about this about one little boy.
Yeah, so just like how you berated me for not reading Numbers 25, you also clearly didn't read the surah because you said, oh, Muhammad said it.
Whatever you think.
Because this is a story about Moses. It didn't happen at the time of Muhammad.
Right. Okay. So yeah. But what I'm telling you is that according to the Quran, which is dictated by Muhammad, this is what happened, right?
Yeah, but it's a story about Moses.
But dictated by Muhammad. This is the same Muhammad who lied about the crucifixion and didn't know about that. This is the same Muhammad who talked about Abraham and didn't know who his wife was. But we are supposed to look at this story and say that what Muhammad said about Moses, which didn't actually happen, actually happened. Thank you for bearing yourself.
In any case, Brother Maverick, I think you say take the young girls who have not known a man, kill the women who have known a man, and keep the young girls for yourself. To say that this is to reintegrate them into society is problematic because...
According to whose understanding? Yours?
No, according to Jewish understanding.
Yeah, what Jewish understanding? Which Jewish scholars are making the insinuation that the Israelites were to do with those little girls what Muhammad did with Aisha? Can you show me any scholarly consensus that says that that's what they were doing?
Yeah. Okay, do you want me to look it up?
Yeah, please do.
You could ramble on, but I just want the chat to know that this is like Christian revisionism. The Jews that lived at the time and the scholarly Jewish class, they don't say that this is for reintegrating women. This is for captive of war, kill all the women which that has known a man, which Islam does not say you shouldn't kill women. But in this, kill all the women that have known a man, but keep the ones that haven't known a man, meaning likely prepubescent girls for yourself.
Likely. I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for you to tell me who it is that interpreted it in Jewish and the Jewish scholars who interpreted it this way.
Are you gonna accept if I do bring you?
Sure.
Are you gonna accept?
Sure. Are you gonna accept when I give you 10 more that say that what you gave me is a complete hogwash?
No, but you're gonna give me Christian authorities. I'm gonna give you Jewish authorities.
Sure. Okay, go ahead. I'm still waiting. Okay.
You gotta give me a few minutes to find this.
Sure. Okay. Well, while I give you a few minutes, check this out. My brother man again is making the same insinuation about taking the little girls, and he says it's problematic. Now, this is typical of what Brother Costa does. He says through his understanding that things are problematic, but he doesn't actually know how to explain how, right? So he says, first, let's talk about Surah. 18:65 through 81. Yes, absolutely. This is a story about Moses and a mysterious figure named Al-Qadir. And who removed the child? Al-Qadir did, but with Allah's direct approval, supposedly, because in 1880, Allah says the child was eliminated, fearing he would burden his parents with rebellion and disbelief. Now, again, that's not justice based on actions, ladies and gentlemen. That is pre-crime. There's no war, no judgment, no rebellion, no nothing. Just what might happen later. Now, if we compare that with Numbers 31, again, where judgment came after an actual spiritual betrayal, Numbers 31:16, for the 8th time, says that Midianite women under Balaam's counsel caused Israel to stumble through corrupt religious practices. We can cross-reference not only Numbers 25, but also Revelations 2:14, as I showed you guys earlier in the debate brief. The young girls were spared because they were not involved in that. They were not harmed, they were not touched, they were not taken for abuse. Now, as for your attempt to say that's not Jewish understanding, wrong. Here's the actual Jewish commentary. This is how you answer a rebuttal, okay? Rashi in the 11th century, who is the most widely cited Jewish exegete, explained that the spared girls were those not guilty of the sin and could be absorbed into Israelite society under strict laws. If you look at the Talmud, the Sotah 43a discusses the wartime procedures and prohibits any improper treatment of captives, requiring integration and legal structure. Again, not abuse. If we look at Maimonides in Mishneh Torah, Hilchat Malakim 8, 3, 4, 5, and 6 outlines how captives must be treated lawfully, marriage only after full integration, mourning, and mutual consent. So no, this isn't Christian revisionism. It's centuries old Jewish legal tradition. The same Moses who wrote Numbers also wrote Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 10 through 14. And guess what that says? It commands marriage, mourning, and prohibits exploitation. The law predates Muhammad by over 1,000 years, and it is far more humane than anything found in the Quran. Meanwhile, let's go back again. Surah 4:24 allows relations with captive women, even if they're married. Surah 65:4 references procedures for girls not yet matured. These are not interpretations. These are in the text. So if you're going to make claims about abuse, don't point at a law that protected captives. You got to point at the sources that actually permit what you're accusing others of doing. And if anybody wants to refer the sources, again, from this debate brief, look at Numbers chapter 25 and 31. Look at the book of Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 10 through 14, and look at Revelation 2:14, as well as Rashi's interpretation of Numbers 31:18, Sotah 43a in the Talmud, Maimonides in Mishnah Torah, Hilchat Malakim, chapter 8, and Surah chapter 18, verses 65 through 81, Surah 4:24, and Surah 65:4. So I yield back.
Before even going to the Jewish sources, it's worthwhile to see what the Bible actually says about taking captives of war. So you have in Deuteronomy 21, okay? 21:10. I'm sure Brother Maverick has read it.
I just gave you the source.
Yeah, I'm just saying 21:10, you've read it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So when you go, it says, and I'm quoting scripture, when you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Now, you can take her as your wife, but what does it say? How do you take her as your wife? Bring her into your home and have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, then you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife.
Yes, I'm so glad you read that.
Yes, yes. So, even if she's kicking and screaming and, no, I don't want to go, you can bring her into your house, cut her nails, shave her head, you're my wife.
Where did it say that you're allowed to force her into your house?
Where does it say anything about whether she rejects you or not? It says... It doesn't say anything.
So as usual, Brother Costa, you are reading in your myopic view into it, thinking that it means that that's what actual scholarship means. And I'm actually glad that you brought up Deuteronomy 21, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, because what you just read actually proves the exact opposite of what you're trying to claim. So I'll walk you through it. Okay. The passage says that if an Israelite man sees a captive woman that he's drawn to, he may take her as a wife, but not on impulse. He has to bring her into his home. He has to let her mourn her family for a full month. And during that time, she shaves her head and trims her nails. You know what do you even know what that's about? No, I'm sure you don't. So I'll explain it to you. Shaving the head and cutting of the nails, trimming of the nails for a woman were cultural signs of mourning and identity reset. That's what that meant. And that's only after that full period of grief and reintegration can he marry her. Now, here's the key. He must treat her like a full wife, not property. Now, what ends up happening is if it doesn't work out or he decides later on he doesn't want to be with her, verse 14 says, if you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave since you have dishonored her. In other words, and I noticed that you skipped over that, there's no exploitation, there's no forced retention, there's no second-class status. This is actually covenant-based marriage with rights, no conquest-based gratification. Now, we can again contrast that.
Just to interrupt you.
Sure, go ahead.
So all of this is from the man's perspective. There is nothing about whether she likes you, whether she accepts, whether she consents. It is implied force in this verse.
Right. So, I mean, we can say the same thing about Aisha, right? But here's the problem.
No,
You're saying, here, I'll answer your question because you're and here, dude, here's the thing. When I'm having a discussion with you, I'm trying to remain patient, but stop laughing as if you're making a valid point here because you're not. I notice you still haven't given me any historical sources or scholarly sources that I asked you for. Let's notice, ladies and gentlemen, when I told him, give me what it is that I'm asking for. Sure, I'll find it, but will you accept them? And here we are still not talking about it. But his implication is that Deuteronomy 21, because it focuses on the man's actions, means that the female had no choice, right? That is an intentional misread based on projecting modern expectations into an ancient legal system, ladies and gentlemen. And now the key to understanding the passage is what the man cannot do. And that's where consent is protected. In Deuteronomy 21, 13 and 14, after the month of mourning, the woman becomes his wife, right? Not a servant and not an object. She is given full marital status under covenantal law. Mind you, this is a Midianite woman. And in verse 14, it says clearly, if you are not pleased with her, you must let her go wherever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as property. That right there, wherever she wishes, already gives her the autonomy that you're claiming she doesn't have. That's consent-based freedom baked into Mosaic law over 1,000 years before Islam. So this insinuation that you're acting like, oh, well, they didn't have a choice, or they had no choices, they were treated like second-class citizens, that's you reading into it. But that's not what the actual truth is.
No, I'm saying that.
I know what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, you can have the equal rights as a bride and this and that, but there's no, in this description, there's no saying that if the girl doesn't want to marry you, then you cannot marry her or anything like that. It says, if you find a girl you find beautiful, you can marry her. You can bring her into your house. You can shave her head and cut her nails and then give her 1 month. But there's nothing to say that she can reject this or,
right.
You know.
So here, again, you're focusing on what's not said in Deuteronomy 21, but you're completely ignoring what is clearly established, right? It establishes safeguards that completely undermine the idea of forced treatment. The woman is brought into the man's home. She is given a full month to mourn her family. She is not touched during this time. The man, thus, he must marry her, not use her, not touch her, not enslave her, marry, which in Mosaic law means full covenantal protection. And if you want references for that, we can look at the book of Exodus 21, verses 10 and 11. Now, if it doesn't work out, or she decides she doesn't want to be with him or whatever, he must, again, let her go wherever she wishes, and he must not sell her or treat her as property. Now, mind you, it says that if he is displeased with her, then he must let her go under the full status of an Israelite citizen. It did not say after a divorce. It said if you are not pleased with her, you must let her go. Now, you got to ask yourself, if this were forced, why allow her to leave freely? Why ban resale? Why legally prohibit any exploitation? You're asking, well, what if she didn't want to marry him? But in ancient covenant law, the forced element would contradict the entire legal framework, is what you're not saying. It's not, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if you don't see it or you don't want to see it, but that's, you continue to try to read in your interpretation, which.
Yeah, it's if you're not pleased with her, then let her go. Not that if she's not pleased with you, let her go. If you understand what that.
I understand what you're saying, but you continue to try to repeat the same point with a myopic insinuation behind it, right? So you're pointing to the phrase in Deuteronomy that if you're not pleased with her, let her go, and arguing that it doesn't say anything about her consent. But here's again the problem with your argument: you're isolating one sentence and ignoring the entire legal structure that surrounds it. So again, we can go back to Deuteronomy 21 and look at all the verses between 10 and 14. And it states that when an Israelite man sees a captive woman and desires to marry her, he can't just take her. He must bring her into his home, allow her to mourn, shave her head, trim her nails, and change her clothing. That isn't just for a cultural ritual. That is a full integration period, letting her get used to the idea of the fact that this guy wants to marry her. And guess what? If she, after all of that, decides that she does not want this man, that by its very nature means that he's going to be displeased with her and he has to let her go. But here's the biggest part that you're missing. If the woman were being forced, the command, you must let her go wherever she wishes, in verse 14 would make absolutely no sense. In a culture where captives were often seen as property. So the law is very clear here. You do not own her. You cannot sell her. You cannot keep her if she wants to leave. You cannot treat her like property. That level of freedom assumes she's not being held against her will.
No, you're making a jump here very clearly.
I'm not the one jumping here, brother.
It's not if she wants to leave, then you have to let her go. Nowhere in the passage does it say that. It says if you are not pleased with her.
Right. And nowhere in the passage does it say that you can take a girl that doesn't want to marry you either. But you read that into that. You read it clearly into there, even though it's not there. Right? Where does it say that a girl was forced to go with a man who wanted to marry her? That was prescribing the legal structure for how it was to happen if you saw a young woman that you wanted to marry.
Captive of war.
A captive of war that's being reintegrated into society. Still waiting on your sources.
Yeah. Though, I mean, there's quite a lot of sources.
I'm sure.
Talmud Bavli, where it says the Talmudic discussion is framed as a concession to human desire, where it says the Torah only permitted the beautiful captive Yefat Torah because of the evil inclination, Yetzer Hara. So the Jewish sources, they can, even if they don't explicitly say sex slavery, what they acknowledge is there is some form of servitude. There's some form of some aspect.
Yeah, I've read this before. I know what you're doing already. You're purposely misrepresenting what it says. Well, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Okay. Yeah. So there is some aspect of servitude, some aspect of sexual inclination. So if you read both of these verses, what's happened? Let's take a holistic picture of what's happened. So you go to war with the Midianites, you win. You're commanded by Jesus, the God, to kill all the boys, all the men, all the young boys, infants, toddlers, whatever, boys, because they're obviously going to grow up to, rebel against God.
Correct.
So, and you kill all of them, the women who have known a man, so meaning that they're married or they've had intercourse before, and you keep the little girls for yourself. And now these little girls, they're roaming around, and Deuteronomy 21 says, if you see a girl that you like, then what do? You bring her into your house. Right,
we've gone over this. We've gone over the legal structure, and we've established that it doesn't say what you want.
Two and two together, and it's very clear that there is some form of
well, Brother Costa, listen, I do respect you, but again, you're reading. Maybe because this is what Muhammad did, you're reading it into what the Israelites did, right? But this is not how they were allowed to treat women, right? Now let me go back and address about the Talmud Bavli, right? You're talking about Kiddushin 21b, and that does say that the Torah allowed the marriage of the captive women as a concession to the Yetzer Hara, right, or evil inclination. But again, you're misrepresenting what that actually means. because the rabbis were not endorsing lust. They're acknowledging human weakness and then surrounding it with strict legal boundaries to regulate and restrain it. That's why Deuteronomy 21:10-14 includes the 1-month mourning period, the required shaving of the head, the nail trimming, the change of the clothing. All of it was designed to cool emotional impulses. And the man has time to rethink his desire of marriage. There's no immediate access, there's no forced relations, and there's no use without full covenant commitment. And the Talmud doesn't stop there. You stop there, but the Talmud does not. In Sotah 43a, it says that the rabbis emphasize that the woman's status as a wife comes with full legal protections, and if the man decides not to proceed, she goes free, which means she wasn't even forced to marriage, which I told you earlier, and she was to go free with full autonomy as a citizen of Israel. That is not abuse. That is law containing human inclination, not indulging it, okay? Now, again, I'm not going to keep going back to the Quran because I don't need to. At the end of the day, what ended up happening was I asked you for a source, you misrepresented what the source said, and then you're reading your modern day, okay, well, I know what guys want. No, that's you. You don't get to read the Costa Apologetics into it. This is what's actually said. I asked you, I asked you, listen, when I ask things on this channel, ladies and gentlemen, it is rhetorical. I'm asking you for things that I know you can't give me, right? You're trying to link Numbers 31 and Deuteronomy 21 to push a narrative that young girls were taken and later married based on desire, but that's just poor exegesis, my brother. It is a willful fusion of unrelated text. So I will be precise with you. Numbers 31:18 says to spare the girls who had not known a man, because Numbers 31:16 makes it clear that the judgment was targeting those involved in the spiritual betrayal at Peor. Go ahead.
Keep for yourself. The verse says keep for yourself.
Yes, he was talking to the nation. He wasn't saying keep the girls for yourself in a way that you're insinuating. We have gone over that time and time again.
No problem. No problem, Maverick. I can accept everything you're saying.
Thank you.
What I wanted to highlight mainly was this explanation that you've given, right, about the, this situation, captives of war. You can then not, and I hope in the future streams you will not bring this as a point of contention against Islam. Yeah? Because you acknowledge that they're being reintegrated into a society, and nowhere in the Quran does it say kill the women that have known a man. Nowhere does it say that. So the Bible goes one step ahead. Fine, no problem. You say God ordered it. That's fine. I can accept that. Fine. If God ordered it, then God ordered it. The main thing is that you cannot then use this as a bone of contention against Islam or say this is why Islam is wrong. Okay, we can agree. I mean, it's pretty similar, both the systems in place. So I think, like, for your Christian audience who think, oh, Islam permits sex slavery and this and that, you can now see the demonstration that, well, Christianity also has a method in place for reintegrating captives of war. Now, I would say personally that the biblical kind of commandments given in times of war are more inhumane than the Islamic commandments in times of war, like killing the animals as well as the young boys or any male. I think that's I can't even describe it. Like, brutal for me, to be honest.
Yeah.
So for your Christian audience, now you can see there's parallels.
So you don't believe that the God of the Bible is the same as your Allah, then?
What do you mean?
Do you believe
the Bible's a trustworthy source? That's
the
difference.
Oh, I see. Nor do I believe that the Quran is a trustworthy source.
Yeah, and you've admitted
right.
The Bible
has
additions.
So here, let me. No. I never admitted that the Bible has additions. I have told you clearly that from the earliest times that we have had the canonization of the Bible, that when there was something that were found in later manuscripts that were not used, for example, the things that you have alluded to that were later additions, that they were in manuscripts that were written in different languages. That doesn't mean that there are later additions, that there is corruption. Now, that's not the conversation that we're having, right? Because at the end of it, brother.
Sorry to interrupt. I've got the VOD recorded where you say that there is additions, but like you have admitted this.
So again, I have admitted that there are things that were added to the text later, that there are notes saying that this was not in the Koine Greek manuscripts that they were using. There's no problem with that. I have no problem with that, right? Because the Bible has never ever claimed perfect preservation. We have had copyist errors from the very beginning, right? But here's the problem, right? The Bible and the Quran to your and I love you, Brother Costa. I pray that one day your eyes will be open to what the real truth is. But the Bible and the Quran, what I'm trying to explain to you, are not doing the same thing. And this, I'm going to close off here because Brother George is coming in. So I'm going to move on to the next guest. And I really do appreciate the conversation. And I thank you so much for calling early on. And I want it known because I didn't mute you at all. I didn't mute you. I don't want to hear this. So there was no muting, right? But here's the thing. Numbers 31 is a thing, ladies and gentlemen, where God is issuing a judgment, right? After a national level betrayal, a centuries long betrayal against the Israelite people, right? Where the Midianite women were deliberately led to Israel and they were doing it for the purposes of spiritual corruption, right? Again, we can look at Numbers chapter 25, verses 1-3 and 31:16. Okay. So the judgment is covenantal and it is morally grounded and focused. It is God's wrath for the constant sin that you refused to relinquish, right? And trying to integrate Jesus into that as part of the Godhead there is no issue with that for me because Jesus is ultimate justice, right? Now, Deuteronomy 21:10-14 builds a fence around desire. And that's the thing. There's no rush. There's full mourning, legal marriage, and the right of release. Okay. But to move on to your second point, and before we bring up Brother George, you said that the numbers in the action.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So I can ask you a question.
Sure.
You mentioned Banu Qurayza and the treatment of the Jewish tribe after the war. You've mentioned that a few times when I've caught your stream as a thing against Prophet Muhammad. Like, you know. So if I was to ask you the question that this group of people that committed treason, by all accounts, they committed treason, they broke an agreement, and they decided to kill the Prophet and the Messenger, which you can draw parallels between, they were, however the Bible describes the Midianites. Why would it then not be acceptable to for the killing of the people involved in Banu Qurayza? That's
an excellent question, and I have no problem with that question. But the thing is, again, so and are you asking it from a framework of like I'm
asking it in a framework whereby you have already
the comparison between Numbers 31? That's what I was like. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So if you're comparing it to Numbers 31, the way that I see it to Muhammad's treatment of the Jewish tribe out of Banu, that would be suggesting that both groups committed treason, so both deserve judgment. But that comparison doesn't, it collapses fast when you look at the details. So I'll give it to you real quick, right? In Numbers 31, God commanded judgment on the Midianites for all the reasons we already talked about, right? I'm not gonna repeat them all over again. You know, you're a smart guy. Now, what we do is we contrast that with Muhammad's actions and Banu Qurayza, right? The Quran never names their offense. I challenge you to look at the Quran and tell me what they did, right? The only details come from later Hadith and Sirah literature, which was written generations later. And I think that you would agree with that, right? Because there's no one in the Quran that names their offense. Think about it. Read the Quran and tell me in the Quran where it names the offense of the tribe at Banu Qurayza, right? And what was the outcome of that? As recorded in Ibn Ishaq and Sahih Muslim, hundreds of males were executed in a single day. And you base that on the ruling of a man who was loyal to Muhammad, right? And the women and children were taken.
Base it off?
What?
You based that on a ruling that was a person close to Muhammad, but what did he base that ruling off?
I don't understand your question. I don't know what he based it off of.
He based it off of. So what happened is, okay, yes, it's not mentioned in the Quran. That's fine.
Sure.
But that doesn't, I mean, you acknowledge that this event happened, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. It's not like to say, it's not mentioned in the Quran, therefore it didn't happen. You often cite Hadith literature, so you do believe that, whether it's true belief or not, that you believe that these things are said to have happened.
Well, the Hadiths were written to help people understand the events of the Quran, were they not?
Yes. So are we saying that Banu Qurayza didn't happen, that the Prophet?
No. I'm asking you a simple question. Are you a Quran only Muslim, or do you believe?
No.
Okay.
No. Okay. Hadiths. Yeah. So this Hadith provides extra contextual things, like you mentioned in the Surah, which is the life of the Prophet. So in this event of Banu Qurayza, many Christians, atheists use this against Muslims, whereby many of the males in this tribe were beheaded because during a battle whereby, I think it was the Battle of the Trench, where the Prophet was in Medina and he was getting attacked from the unified tribes of Mecca. Okay, he had made an agreement with the Jewish people, the Jewish tribes living there, and they had said, "We will protect you." And they had a peace agreement.
Right, we know the story. Right, we know the story.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, you know the story. Okay, fine. So after it was found that they committed treason and they tried to attack them from behind, what the Prophet, the man that was close to the Prophet, the companion, I forget his name, but he issued this judgment, ironically, not from Islamic sources. He went to the Old Testament sources for treason, and he declared the punishment based on this. So in the Old Testament, for treason, the punishment is beheading.
Okay, and that's fine. I understand where you're coming from, but here's the thing: we are mirroring this. We are looking at events that you are making an attempt to correlate, and you're saying, why is Numbers 31 okay, but the event with this one not okay? Here's the reason. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. This is where I'm going to finish off, right? And I want to leave you thinking about this, right? Because the incident at Banu Qurayza, right? The reason that I mentioned the Quran not saying anything about it is it was important. I don't know if maybe you thought I was just being sarcastic. I wasn't. The details don't even, if this was a judgment from God, then you would expect it to be in the word of God, which you look at the Quran as, but it's not in the word of God. All the information that we have as far as their supposed treason and their punishment come from the Hadith, like Sirah and Ibn Ishaq and Sahih Muslim 1766, where it says that Muhammad allowed Sa'id ibn Muda to issue the verdict where hundreds of men were executed, women and children taken captive. No revelation, no command from Allah, just a political ally making the call. Here's the point that I'm going to make to you real quick. And then I'm going to talk to George, okay? If this were truly from God, then why is there no Quranic record of the judgment? Why is it handled by a man and not by divine decree? If it was divine decree, then it should be in the book that you look at as divine, and it is not, and that is the biggest problem that I have with it. Brother Costa, thank you. I'm going to get to Brother George real quick. I really appreciate you being here, man. And I really do appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about Numbers 31. But at the end of the day, you were the one that I wanted to talk to, and I really appreciate the time you gave me, brother. I love you, brother, and I look forward to seeing you soon, man. All right? Have a good one, brother.